Okay, welcome in, guys. We're going to be starting shortly in just a couple minutes. I just want to direct you guys to the screen and make sure that you're able to see that we want you all to join the PreMed STAR site. You can see that we have apps both in the App Store for Apple and also for Android. So go ahead and make sure you download the PreMed STAR app so that you guys can always be checking your profiles and staying active on the site. Let's just go ahead and give one more minute for everyone to log in here. And then do you guys mind posting in the chat if you guys can hear me? Where are you guys tuning in from? Perfect. Looks like we have people from all over the country. Great. Anyone else in California? Okay, guys, so let's go ahead and get started here. Perfect. See someone from Berkeley. Like I said, make sure you download the PreMed STAR app and you can create your account on our site. We have a lot of really exciting things going on, so you guys are definitely going to want to join in on that. We also have 2 poll questions that should have popped up on your guys' screen. If you could take just 1 minute to answer those, we'd really appreciate it, okay? Perfect. So let's go ahead and start here. Basically, what I wanted to do is just start off by introducing myself and PreMed STAR a little bit to those of you who haven't joined the site yet. My name is Lauren. I'm a graduate from UC Irvine, and I'm going to be hopping into this next application cycle. And let me just show with you guys real quick a little bit about PreMed STAR's site. Sorry about that. Let me show my profile with you guys. And I'm happy to show you sort of all the features you guys can take advantage of here on the site. So you see here, this is my personal PreMed STAR profile. You can add a little about me video and a little bio about yourself and what you want to get out of your pre-med journey and also your time as a physician. You can easily log all of your stats in terms of GPA, MCAT score, clinical hours, and you also can keep track of all of your extracurricular activities. This is a really great feature because once you go into applying and you have to list all of your involvements, everything's right here with the dates and the little description, so you can just easily copy and paste. Applications are stressful enough, so it's good to have everything on track. So as you see, there's all these different extracurriculars. You have work experience, keep track of your clinical hours, any type of research you've done, publications, and any type of award you received. So this is just a great way to stay on track and make sure that you're going to be ready come application time, okay? And then real quick, I'm just going to show you guys a little bit about the site here. You can see the wall here. Everyone say congrats to Magnus. He is the pre-med of the week here. So go ahead and go onto the site, send him a little congrats, and you can read about him and his pre-med journey there. One last thing I wanted to show with you guys is the school. So PreMed STAR actually has medical schools directly on the site who you can interact with, message, and learn more about. Essentially, if you're active on the site, they'll see your profile, they'll see what you're doing, what you kind of want to get out of medicine, and they can directly recruit you. So that's just a huge incentive to update your profile and keep all that going. And one thing I want to play for you guys is just this on track and the recruitment center.
Join our online community of pre-medical students for free at www.premedstar.com and tell a friend.
Okay, great. And then all you pre-meds out there, how many of you are studying to take the MCAT right now? Looks like a bunch of you. How are you guys preparing? Kaplan, okay, some test prep people. So for anyone who hasn't signed up for test prep yet, we have this really cool, exciting challenge that's going to be through PreMed STAR and Kaplan. So basically, this is a 24-hour invite challenge where we want you to invite all your pre-med friends to join PreMed STAR, tell them to download the app and to register and create an account, and whoever brings the most people on board will win a free comprehensive Kaplan MCAT prep course. All right, so you guys can really take advantage of this. You'll totally ace your MCAT, and then you'll just have an extra free resource. Who doesn't love that? Perfect. So go ahead and grab your screenshot here. Hope you all are able to find the app inside your app store, and don't forget to invite your friends, okay? Okay, without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and bring Dr. Capers on screen. So everyone, please say hi to Dr. Capers. He's a cardiologist, and perfect.
Well,
we can hear you.
hello, everybody. I'm glad to be able to spend a little bit of time with you tonight, and hopefully we get some questions answered. I might be speaking faster than I usually speak, so that Lauren and I can get through as many questions as possible.
Perfect. Great. So Dr. Capers, why don't you just give a quick little introduction about yourself?
Yes, so I am an interventional cardiologist, which means that I'm a heart doctor who specializes in opening blocked arteries in the heart with balloons, laser stents, and other devices. One of the main things we do is treat heart attack patients. But in addition to that, I serve as the Associate Dean for Admissions at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. I'm in my 9th year in that position. And so it is something I'm really passionate about. Medical school admissions, for me, being a doctor is a dream come true. And so I love to help other people make their dreams come true when it comes to getting into medical school. I am from Dayton, Ohio, went to college at Howard University, medical school at Ohio State, and did all my residency and fellowship at Emory University in Atlanta after that. So anything else you want to know, you can just ask me.
Okay, perfect. Thanks so much. So great to have you here. Let's just go ahead and jump into these questions. So we're going to start off with these first few. That's going to give us a little bit of insight into you, I believe. So the first one is a little bit more lifestyle-like. What are your tips for making the MD journey more tolerable?
Stay close to your family, stay close to your faith, and you have to take time out to try your best. Sometimes we fail, but try your best to continue your hobbies. So if before you started on this journey, you play the guitar, or if you like to jog, or swim, or play basketball, then as you're studying hard, preparing for exams, don't put aside those things that really are part of who you are. So stay close to your family, your faith, whatever that is, and those things that really make you comfortable, the things that you've always enjoyed doing, don't give those up. You might have to be more strategic with your time. There were times when I was studying for a big standardized exam, and I would have to actually schedule basketball. I would actually write it on my schedule, 2 to 3:30, play basketball at the gym, 3:30, shower, 4 o'clock, get dressed and start studying again. So you might have to be strategic, but remember to remain a whole person as you're going through this. That'll really help keep you energized.
Okay, great. And then what would you say is the most defining moment of your career so far?
Very difficult question to answer. The most defining moment. I'll tell you about one of my proudest moments. I'm not sure if that fits the bill for what you're asking. Whether you're in medicine or not, one of the dangers that we can get when we do things over and over and over again is that we stop thinking and we simply move by reflexes. So when I was at Emory's medical center, anybody who knows anything about Atlanta, you know Grady Hospital, this huge Mammoth County hospital that seems to take care of all the poor people in Atlanta. When I was doing my training there, there was a section of the emergency room dedicated to people with asthma, people who were having asthma attacks. They call it the asthma room. And when you worked an 8-hour or 12-hour shift in there, I would go home and I could hear wheezing in my sleep. But one of my proudest moments as a physician came from a time when I was assigned to the asthma room. I was called by the clerk and said, "There's a Mr. Jones, you need to come and admit." And I went to the entrance of the asthma room, and it's a room, imagine a room full of people breathing in medication, and they're all wheezing. And I saw Mr. Jones, who I was supposed to admit. But before just going to autopilot and putting him on all the medicines that we usually put asthmatics on, I just stopped and looked at him. And what I noticed, and anybody on this webinar who either has asthma or cares for somebody who has asthma will know this. Asthma is a problem with getting the air out of your lungs. Usually you can get it in okay, but people who are having an asthma attack, they really have to struggle to get the air out. But when I was looking at him, he seemed to be having trouble getting the air in. He didn't have any trouble getting it out. So rather than be on autopilot and treat him like every other asthmatic, I listened to his throat, and I could tell he was having a narrowing in his throat. We call that stridor. And so I knew there's something wrong with his vocal cords. I called the ENT doctors. They came down, used a special instrument to look at his vocal cord, saw that one of them was paralyzed. And when they worked him up further, they found he had cancer. He had cancer of his larynx. So I was very proud because had I just went on autopilot, they called me to tell me the patient had asthma. Had I just put him on his asthma medicines and admitted him, then we might not have diagnosed that cancer and potentially saved his life. So the lesson there is try your best to always be present in the moment, thinking through the problem, and really try your best to guard against just being on autopilot, because when you're on autopilot, you will miss things.
Okay, great. Perfect. Okay, next question here. So these are some questions specific to Ohio State University School of Medicine. And a lot of our viewers were wondering if you have specific GPA cutoffs, specifically if you have any different cutoffs for those who are minorities.
We do not have different cutoffs for minorities. And let me just speak to that for a minute. You wouldn't want that. I mean, you know, if you're, I assume that maybe it was a minority question, a minority potential applicant who asked that question. But I want you to think about that. You really wouldn't want that. For instance, if the cutoff for GPA was, let's say, 3.0 for majority students and 2.5 for minority students, then you'd be walking around that medical school feeling like everybody's looking at you, feeling like you don't deserve to be there. You really don't want that. You want to be able to look all of your classmates in the eye and say, hey, I've done just as well as you have to get here. So you really don't want that. You might think you do now if you're a minority student, but trust me, you would not want that. Everybody in the school would be looking at every minority student in the school like you all got some benefit, like you got into medical school and you didn't deserve it. You want to be there and you want to be able to look every professor, every staff member, every classmate in the eye and say, hey, I belong here. I worked just as hard as you did, and I achieved just what you did in order to get here. So no different cutoffs for majority or minority students. Our GPA cutoff for the overall and the science GPA is 3.0, with the thinking being that medical school is a good bit more challenging than undergraduate. And so generally the thought is if you couldn't manage a B average in undergraduate, you're really going to have some struggles in medical school. And when medical schools have these cutoffs, even though it might seem they're being arbitrary and trying to keep you from your dream, they really are thinking about who's going to be successful. The last thing a medical school wants to do is admit somebody and have them so battered and bruised after a couple of years because they're having academic difficulties, and then they wind up leaving with a lot of student loan debt. That's really not what medical schools want. And so for us in our curriculum, what we've seen is that if somebody had less than a 3.0 in undergraduate, they have some real struggles in medical school. So we've made our floor or threshold 3.0 on the GPA. For the MCAT, I'll go ahead and say that because I see that's the next question there. we go by percentile, and our threshold for the percentile is 49th percentile. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you say something? I missed you.
Oh, you predicted one of the future questions. Great job. And so with Ohio State, do you know how old the oldest current student is there? And also, does your school have resources for those who are struggling with the curriculum?
So I don't know about the oldest candidate in this current class because we're still accepting, I mean, we're still screening through applications, but I can tell you last year we accepted somebody, our oldest was 43 years old. And we've had, I think we've had students older than that in their first year medical school class, but last year we had a 43-year-old. I don't know about this class yet. It's still shaping up. We do have resources. We have, first of all, a wellness team that consists of a counselor, a certified counselor, a psychiatrist, that's an MD, a psychiatrist, and they have a staff of counselors and social workers and learning strategies specialists, people that sit down and really give good advice about helping you get organized with your study habits. We also have a team of tutors. We have physician tutors, and we have kind of a layered approach where we also will pay some students to be peer tutors. So if, for instance, the first year medical student has some academic difficulty, they would see our Dean for Student Affairs, who would then make some decisions about whether or not this person can be helped by a peer tutor, or whether they need a physician tutor, or whether or not it might be something that's not academic difficulty, but other difficulties, and maybe they might need some counseling, because probably half the time students are struggling in medical school, it's not academic, it's because of life issues and life stresses.
Okay, and then I did see a question come in the Q&A here specific to Ohio State. Do you have any advice for a prospective student who's been put on the wait list?
Just hang in there with us and be patient. So for those who don't know what our system is, after you interview at Ohio State, you are, after October 15th anyway, within a few weeks, you are either accepted or rejected or something in between that's called deferred, and that becomes our waiting list. And what happens with those students is we're saying they're certainly too strong to reject right now, not quite strong enough to accept outright, but we certainly might accept them later. And so we ask them to be patient while we interview more people. Sometimes they might not hear from us until April 30th. April 30th is the date when all students with multiple acceptances will have to drop all but one. That's when usually waiting lists really start to move. So we ask you to be patient. We have at times accepted people off the waiting list as late as the 1st of August.
Okay, thank you so much. And then we have some international students here who are interested in Ohio State. Does Ohio State accept international students? Do they accept international students who did their undergrad in the US? And what about any financial aid options for them?
So we only accept international students who hold a visa, green card, or permanent residence, or if they are refugees or asylees from a different country. International students without those categories are not accepted at the Ohio State University College of Medicine. We do accept students who fall under the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, or DACA. We do accept applicants from DACA students, and currently we have a medical student who has the DACA status. But international students only if they are permanent residents or have a visa or green card or have official refugee status.
Okay. And then one of our viewers is asking, do you guys have any more interview invites that you're going to be sending out at this time?
Yes, we interview all the way until the end of March. And at this point, I think when I checked today, we have almost the first 2 weeks of February filled out. So still 6 weeks worth of interview spots to fill.
Okay, great. So keep an eye out for those guys. Okay, And if you've already applied and you haven't heard back by January, is it safe to assume that you might not be admitted?
No, no, and especially depending on the medical school. And I'll use mine as an example. So we broke last year's record for applications this year with over 7,000. We still have our screeners working very hard to finish up screening some applications. So there are still some applications that have not even been fully screened yet, and they're all going to be screened. So no, you cannot assume that you've been rejected if you haven't heard anything by January. Don't assume you've been rejected until you get a notice telling you that you've been rejected.
Okay, awesome. And then I see Kristen brought up a good question inside the Q&A, and she's wondering if a majority of your class is filled with direct admit students, or if most students take at least one gap year in between.
Actually, we're about 50-50 right now. About half of our class, our current first-year medical school class, I think it was 49%, took a gap year or years, with approximately half being traditional, that is, going right through college and starting medical school within a few months of college graduation.
Okay, great. And then on average, how soon should someone expect a reply regarding an acceptance if they had done an application early on?
It's really difficult to tell. There are some medical schools who will take all of the applications in order. Others have different formulas, like they're going to screen the out-of-state applications first and save the in-state applications later. Still others might have some other formula. So really difficult to tell. The best thing to do would be to call that school and see what they do. The best advice I can give you, though, is to be patient. When you apply to medical school, I know you're going to want to see something, but a lot of times it can be a long stretch before you hear anything. When that happens, if your curiosity is just getting the best of you, you can always pick up the phone and call and say, I'm just calling to check on the status of my application. But it's hard for me to answer that question because it can vary so much from school to school.
Okay, great. And is admissions really rolling?
Admissions is really rolling at most medical schools. Now, for those who may not know what that means, and I'm saying that because when I was a pre-med student and I heard the phrase rolling admissions, I didn't really know what that meant. So rolling admissions means that as the applications come in, they're being screened and we start to fill up interview spots. And as we interview, we start to accept people and fill up seats in the class. And so you can tell from that, you have every reason in the world to apply as early as you possibly can. Because sometimes an applicant who, let's say, is above average in competitiveness, not a superstar, but above average in competitiveness, that student, if they apply early, might get an interview, and if they have a good interview, they might get accepted. You can take that very same applicant and you can put them later in the cycle when more of the class has been filled and it's more competitive, and they won't get in. But it can be identical. So yes, at most medical schools, they practice rolling admissions. We practice rolling admissions at Ohio State. The last time I was thinking about it, I remember that Yale University, for instance, didn't. I don't know if they've changed now, but what they would do is they would review all the applications, then do all of their interviews, and then after completing their last interview, then they sit down and go about the business of deciding who gets in. But most medical schools don't do it that way. Most medical schools do rolling admissions.
Okay, perfect. And then what are some common myths that a lot of people associate with getting into medical school?
Oh boy, there could be a lot of those. Let me start with some, and it's been a long time since I was a pre-med student, but let me tell you about some myths when I was a pre-med. When I was a pre, and I hope this isn't there anymore. When I was a pre-med student, there was this myth that in medical school, the exam grades are always curved such that someone always has to fail. That it's impossible for the whole class to pass, but that somebody has to fail because of how they grade the curve. That is absolute nonsense. I hope that rumor is not out there anymore. That is not how medical schools do it. It is absolutely possible for every single person taking the exam to pass. Another myth is, maybe not a myth, but a misconception is about applying. So what I just said about rolling admissions is very important, and you really should make every effort to apply as early as you can. Most medical schools have an application deadline of November 1st. It would be a grave mistake for you to say, well, as long as I have it in by October 28th, I'm okay. No, the closer you are to the deadline, boy, there have already been people who've been screened and interviewed and accepted, and you can really do yourself a disservice. So that is a misconception about getting into medical school. And I'm sorry if that didn't hit what everybody wanted, but please just type in exactly what myths you're talking about, and I can let you know the real deal.
Exactly. Go ahead and throw those into the Q&A, guys, and we'll start filtering through those. And then Dr. Capers, do you have any specific advice for reapplicants?
I'm so glad you asked that question. Our webinar participants can, at their leisure, go to our website. If you just Google the Ohio State University College of Medicine, and then go to our admissions page. There's a tab on that admissions page called Tips and Advice. And I've written a long essay on advice for the reapplicant. I've also written a long essay on medical school interview tips. We put those there to be helpful to you, so please, please take advantage of that. I can sum it up very quickly. If you were rejected from medical school, then medical school saw some deficiencies in your application. You have to be the one to take charge and find out what those deficiencies were. All medical schools have a paper trail. So if you apply to Ohio State and you get rejected, there's something written down somewhere that says why you got rejected. So now in our rejection letter, we actually invite rejected applicants to contact us for either a teleconference or a one-on-one face-to-face meeting where we can tell you what your weaknesses were perceived to be, and we can give you some coaching about how to have better luck, better success next time. But you've got to start that process. And another, I think, really big piece of advice and a big misstep that students make who are rejected is being in too much of a rush and wanting to reapply again immediately. So think about the application cycle. Applications open up in June. Most people, most medical schools start interviewing in the fall. Some August, but most start in September. April 30th is when all students with multiple acceptances have to drop all but one. So it's usually in the spring, unless you were really not a competitive applicant. It's usually in the spring that most people are starting to get rejection notices. Well, let's say you get rejected in the spring, and let's say the reason you were rejected is because the admissions committee thought you didn't have enough experiences to demonstrate you want to be a doctor. Well, the next application cycle opens up June 1st. Is that enough time between April and June 1st for you to really improve on your application? No. So unless it's for very specific circumstances, unless you've been advised to reapply the next cycle, often, and this is hard for students to hear, often the best advice is to forget about the very next cycle, and you need to take that whole next year to work on improving what your perceived weaknesses were. So a big misstep we see amongst reapplicants is they get rejected, they find out in April, and then they just immediately reapply the very next cycle. That usually is a big mistake.
Okay, thank you for sharing that, and great resources for reapplicants from Ohio State. Okay, so you mentioned a lot and warned a little bit about the woes of applying later in the application cycle. Do you think if someone's not able to get their app out until later on in the cycle, if it's better for them to wait until the next round?
It depends on when it is. It looks like the participant is asking about mid-July. Mm-hmm. I don't consider that late. I would definitely go ahead and apply mid-July. I would think of the cycle almost in 2 months. So, you know, June and July is early. August and September is kind of middle. If you're applying in October, you're applying late. So I would say mid-July, we would consider that still early. So if you're ready in mid-July, go ahead and apply.
Okay, awesome. And then what are some tips that you have for candidates to successfully communicate their personal story through essays and interviews?
That's easy. It's the easiest thing. It's almost like the wisdom that we've all heard. It's easy to remember when you tell the truth. So when you tell a lie, you got to kind of remember later on, let's see, what lie did I tell? But it's easy to tell the truth. And it's easy on an interview, and it's easy in your essay to tell your story. Just tell your story. You're the only person on planet Earth that is exactly like you. What you absolutely need to do in a personal statement is have these three components. Number one, you want to be a doctor. Number two, why? Answer the question, why? Why do you want to be a doctor? And number three, what was the journey that you went through that makes you certain that you want to be a doctor? For 40,000 medical school applicants every year, there are 40,000 different stories. I would say try not to, sometimes students concentrate too much on trying to be different and trying to have an opener. I would say just tell your story in your own voice. A couple of missteps that we see people make on a personal statement is waiting, remember it's about a page, waiting until the very last paragraph on the page to state that you want to be a physician. Remember, these medical schools are all getting applications in the thousands. And while I'm very proud of our screening program at Ohio State, because we have 80 faculty members that we train to read your applications, there are some medical schools that have 2 or 3 people doing the screening, which means, as you can imagine, they're really skimming and going very fast. And so if you wait until the very last paragraph to say that you want to be a doctor, then they might miss that. So I would start right up front that you want to be a doctor and start with the why, and then you can pontificate on other things later on in the essay, but don't wait until the very last paragraph to get to the main point of your essay.
Okay, great. And then how does the admissions committee weigh the different aspects of an application in regards to GPA, letters of rec, and personal statement and such?
So several years ago, the Association of American Medical Colleges, AAMC, and I'll give you another great resource, AAMC.org, AAMC.org. The AAMC is kind of the umbrella organization for all of the MD granting schools in the US and Canada. And that website is so very useful for anyone that wants to go to medical school, AAMC.org. Well, a few years ago, the AAMC started a project called Holistic Review in Medical School Admissions. And it was a philosophy that when we are evaluating candidates for medical school, we should put a balanced emphasis on 3 things. Their experiences you had that we think will make you a good doctor, your personal attributes, things about you that will make you a good doctor, like collegiality, do you work well in teams, compassion, persistence, etc. And the third is just what you would guess, academic metrics, that's your MCAT and GPA. So experiences, attributes, and metrics. Experiences, attributes, and metrics, the holistic review philosophy says we should put a weight of 33 1/3% on each one of those. And now what goes without saying then is that you could be relatively weak in one of those areas, but still very strong in the other 2, and still be somebody that deserves to get into medical school and maybe get accepted to medical school and will go on to be a fantastic physician. So experiences, attributes, and metrics. For those of us who follow holistic review, which is probably most medical schools now, we should be putting a weight of 33 1/3% on each of those major categories. We certainly do at The Ohio State University. It's really a part of our DNA.
Okay, great. And then what do you find most pre-meds have that is the biggest misconception in regards to preparing for applications?
So I told you that when we, in our rejection letter, we invite students to contact us for a teleconference or a face-to-face meeting where we can talk about where they fell short and what they could do better next time. One of the most common mistakes we see is students not applying to enough medical schools. And one of the common mistakes that we see is people taking kind of the same strategy that they use to apply to college and doing some of the same things when they apply to medical school. Let me be specific. The average high school senior applied to 5 colleges. And obviously, if you're in college, that worked out well for you. That would be a huge mistake for you to apply to only 5 medical schools. We know from stats kept by the AAMC, the average number of schools that the applicant who was successful at getting into medical school applied to is 16. It's actually 15.7, but I don't want you to try to figure out how to apply to 7/10 of a medical school, so you can round up to 16. So under no circumstances should you apply to fewer than 16 medical schools. And if there are some weaknesses with your application, that number might need to be 20, 25, 30, or even 35. So some of the biggest missteps is when people, because if you're traditional, if you're not taking a gap year, then there really is just 2.5 years between the time you were a high school senior applying to college and the time when you're a college student applying to medical school. And since high school seniors on average apply to just 5 colleges, that's a mistake we see them make when they apply to medical school. Another that's in the same vein is the fact that, as we all know, with the SAT and the ACT, well, you can take those tests as many times as you want. You can take the ACT 50 times and only send in the one score where you really did very well. And your colleges won't know anything about those other 49 ACTs. We sometimes see students who keep taking the MCAT, without changing their preparation process. And so they have all of these MCATs that are poor, and it's because they're still thinking like a high school senior applying to college. The big difference is that the company that makes the primary medical school application service, or AAMC, is the same company that makes the MCAT. And so whether you want them to or not, every time you take the MCAT, it's going to show up on your medical school application. So do not take the MCAT until you really feel confident, like you have prepared your very best. So those are some big misconceptions that people have. They kind of take those high school or applying to college strategies and do those same things because they say, hey, it worked, I'm in college, now I'll do those same things. Do not take the MCAT until you're ready, and do not apply to fewer than 16 schools. Okay,
so going off of that, how do people find out which schools they should apply to?
Well, so glad you asked. So aamc.org, and I'm going to give you some more initials, Medical School Admissions Requirements, or MSAR. That is a publication put out by the AAMC that you can access on aamc.org, and it lists all 150 plus medical schools in the US and Canada, and it tells you everything you want to know about those schools. Their mission, their tuition, which is important, how big the class is, the average and the range for the GPA, the average and the range for the MCAT, where do the students come from? You know, is it University of Texas where 100% of the students are Texas residents? That will be good for you to know so that you don't waste your time applying to the University of Texas if you're not a Texas resident. So the MSAR has everything in it that you want to know. There may be other sources for you to start with your medical school listing, but I personally usually advise students to get the MSAR. Now, it's not free. There is some cost for it, but it's relatively minimal. I think something like $20 or $25.
Okay, so we have covered the aspects of people's stats in regards to their GPA, MCAT, and financial and demographic components. How are some other ways that some prospective applicants could figure out if a school is necessarily the right fit for them?
So all schools have a mission statement. So in fact, every year medical schools have to update their entry in the MSAR, which reminds me, that's something I need to do this week. I'm a little late filling that out. So every year we have to update that. One of the entries we put for our medical school, and not just me in Ohio State, all of the medical schools, is our mission. What is the mission of the medical school? So that is really important for you to read. So let me give you some examples. There are some medical schools who they are clear that their mission is to produce physician scientists, physicians who are going to spend a significant part of time during their career doing research, practicing medicine, but also doing research. And the curriculum is set up to help people who want to be physician scientists thrive. On the other hand, there are some medical schools whose mission is to produce primary care physicians, to serve the underserved. They want to produce physicians who are going to spend 100% of their time taking care of patients. If you are someone who wants to spend all of your time taking care of patients, then you actually might be a better fit at a medical school that has that mission. If you are someone that wants to really focus on scientific investigation and research in your career, then you might be a better fit at one of those research-oriented medical schools. So reading the medical school's mission in MSTAR is probably the best way to know if you're a good fit.
Okay, thank you. And then in regards to applications, how important is it for applicants to specifically get letters of recommendations from physicians?
I would say it can help. One of the, let's go back to that holistic review. 3 main categories that you will be judged on: experiences, attributes, and academic metrics. Under experiences, one of the important ones is healthcare related experiences. Many students get that by shadowing a physician. You don't have to shadow a physician. You can volunteer in a hospital or a nursing home or free clinic. But if you shadow a physician and you have a good relationship with that physician, then a letter of recommendation from that physician can actually be very powerful. So you can certainly get into medical school without it. And in fact, I would say most of the applications that I see do not have a letter of recommendation from a physician. But I would say if you have that, that's particularly powerful.
Okay, great. And do you have any advice for anyone who's seeking letters of recommendation who have been out away from university for a couple years?
So students like this usually fall into 1 or 2 categories. Some of them take post-baccalaureate courses or graduate school. So let's say somebody graduated from college 4 or 5 years ago, and since then, in order to start to prepare for medical school again, they've taken some post-baccalaureate courses or even gotten a formal graduate degree. Then get your letters of recommendation from those professors who've seen you most recently. The other group of people, though, that might fall in this category have not taken additional classes. So maybe you graduated from college 3 years ago. Now you're applying to medical school and you haven't taken another class. Well, you will have to somehow get in touch with those professors that had you in class. At the college, at the very least, they do have your transcript, so they would be able to say what grades you got. Hopefully there's someone that's still there that can talk about more than just what grades you got. You'd be surprised. A lot of times if you can contact a professor that you had 2 or 3 or 4 years ago, what you want to do is go in and meet with them. You don't want to do this by email or even by telephone. If it's possible, you want to go in and meet with them. Take with them your CV so that they can really fill out your letter of application, your letter of recommendation, and they'll write you a letter of recommendation. It is part of the requirement, actually, of being a college professor to help students out this way. So you don't have to feel like you're asking them for some huge favor. That really is part of what they get paid to do.
Okay, great. And then we kind of touched on this earlier, and you mentioned that GPA only accounts for just one component of the holistic review.
GPA/MCAT. So the academic metrics, that's if the medical school is doing holistic review, that is 33 1/3% of your evaluation. Now, having said that, I hope it's clear, and maybe if it's, so I'll say it if it isn't clear, that is for people who have a GPA or MCAT above the threshold. So you have to be above the threshold to then have that holistic review applied. So for instance, if you have a 2.0 GPA, you know, you're probably not even going to be evaluated further because your GPA suggests that you probably would not be successful in medical school. But once you're above the threshold, then the GPA and MCAT together under holistic review make up 1/3 of your evaluation.
Okay, thank you for specifying that. And we do see a question here in regard to GPA specifically. If someone has a 3.0 to 3.5 they're wondering if they should even apply to medical school.
Yes, but it depends, right? So every individual is different. That's why I told you our threshold is 3.0. That means we have some 3.0 students who not only got interviewed, but some of our current medical students had a 3.0. So if your GPA is on the low side, a very strong MCAT can counteract that. So yeah, I wouldn't take yourself out of the game if your GPA is above 3.0. What I would do though is if you have access to a pre-med advisor or a medical school admissions officer, sit down and go over with them your academic record and get some good advice about whether or not they think it's a good idea for you to apply, or if you should hold off until you are able to really buttress your academic record some.
Okay, perfect. And then I actually see a really interesting question come in on the Q&A here. And Sarah is wondering if admissions committees actually do review your online presence when you are applying.
It depends on the medical school. So some medical schools, yes, they do. And this is a good segue for me to talk about professionalism. If you're applying to medical school, you're applying to be a professional. So the expectation for professional behavior begins now. Because as an applicant, if you're shown to have some behavior that we consider unprofessional, that can take you out of the game, such that you don't get into medical school. So your online presence, be careful about what you have on your Facebook page. You don't want to have a picture of you dancing on top of a car, pouring a beer over your head with your shirt off. I mean, that may be a lot of fun, but young people, you have to realize every time you have fun in life, you don't have to document it. If you put it on Facebook or Twitter or Instagram, somebody might see it, and it's probably not worth it. So have fun, enjoy your life, but you don't have to document everything that you do, because there are some medical schools who might have somebody in the office whose job it is to really do kind of an internet scan on you.
Okay, interesting. And do you have any recommendations for someone who has a low undergrad GPA who wants to go to medical school? What's your advice on post-bac programs or master's programs?
So I really love these one-year special master's programs, SMP special master's programs. And let me tell you the difference between those and just any master's program. The ones that are specifically called SMPs, and there are a few examples, and not that I'm recommending one or two over others, but I'll tell you just the ones that come to mind, and there certainly can be others. Georgetown has one, University of Cincinnati has one, University of Toledo has one. There are other schools that have these special master's programs. Well, what makes them special? Well, what makes them special is that they're 1 year. Usually there's no research required. It's just classwork for a year. And what makes them special is that they are at universities that have medical schools, and very often the curriculum will include some of the very same courses that the first-year medical students take. The last thing, and probably the most important thing that makes them special, is that usually the director of the program writes you a letter of recommendation where they put your grades in this program in the context of the first-year medical school class. An example is if I were attending one of these programs, the letter of recommendation might say, Quinn Capers is a student in our special master's program. They take the same microbiology and biochemistry class that our first-year medical students take. Quinn's grade in microbiology was 85%, which places him right in the 50th percentile compared to our first-year medical students. So the beauty of that is now medical school admissions committees don't have to worry about how you will do in medical school, because you're holding your own against medical students. So that's why those are so very valuable. So if you have a low undergraduate GPA, there are a few ways you can go. You can take, I say, a la carte post-baccalaureate courses. So a class here and a class there. That is probably the least effective route and the one that's met with the least success. The second thing is a formal post-bac program where you are a full-time student for a full year, sometimes 2 years. That is probably the next most preferred. The most preferred, in my opinion, and this is just one man's opinion, is these 1-year special master's programs. Let me say this too about that. Get some advice before you pick a master's program. All of these special master's programs, they're in things like a master's in physiology, or a master's in anatomy, or a master's in something called biomedical science or medical science. If you choose to do another master's degree, get some advice about the topic of the master's degree. Sometimes students will pick an MPH, a master's degree in public health. It seems to make sense. It's public health, and after all, you're trying to get into medical school. But if the reason that you didn't get into medical school, or the reason that you weren't competitive enough and you wanted to get a master's, is because of low undergraduate science courses, then you want that master's degree to have a lot of science courses. That'll be your way of showing medical school admissions committees that you can handle the hard sciences. A master's degree in public health just does not have enough of what we consider the hard sciences. So that's a big mistake that I see students make. They don't ask us, they just go out and do it and get an MPH, and then they apply, and they don't get in, and then they come in and meet with us, and we say, well, you should do one of these special master's programs, and they say, well, I've already got a master's degree. Yeah, but you got a master's degree. You should have talked to us first. We would have told you that in your situation, a master's in public health is not the master's degree you should have gone for.
Okay.
I hope that helps somebody.
That looks like it does help from the Q&A. And we actually had a good follow-up question. And someone's wondering if online master's degrees pull the same weight as in-person programs.
It kind of depends. So there are some very reputable online programs and some that are not so reputable. I would say if the online program is actually directed by a school that is accredited, and if some portions of it, like the exams, are proctored, so sometimes an online degree program, when it's exam time, you do have to go somewhere and have a proctored exam, then those actually might be considered reputable. If the reason you're going to do an online master's degree is to be competitive for medical school, my advice would be check with a few medical schools first and ask them, say, hey, is this master's degree, is this going to be respected when I get that?
Okay, great. And then here's some good questions I thought were really unique and something that we should address. How does the admissions committee look at academic suspensions or academic integrity violations?
Academic suspension, and I'm taking that to mean someone whose grades fell below a certain minimum and they were put on academic probation or academic suspension. Mm-hmm. If they later came back from that, so let's say you come in and you have a terrible freshman year and you finish your freshman year with, let's say, a 1.5 GPA, and you're put on academic probation. And then you slowly, methodically work your way back up to a strong GPA, and then you go to graduate school. Absolutely, yes, you can come back from that. I can think of offhand several students with that story who are now in our medical school. So yes, you can work your way back from that. You've got to take your time, and you've got to do some fact finding. Why were you on academic suspension? What was going on that your grades were so bad that you were on academic suspension? Be honest with yourself, and then you need to make some changes. Academic integrity, let me just address the whole issue of an institutional action. So an institutional action is where your institution, i.e. your college or university, had to take action against you because you broke the rules. And I usually, when I'm talking to pre-med students, ask this question. And so I'll ask you, Lauren, since you're the only one that I can talk to, mm-hmm. What do you think is the most common institutional action we see for students who are between the ages of 17 and 21? I'll give you one guess.
Plagiarism?
Nope. Guess again. I'll give you two guesses.
I don't know.
I'll give you a hint. Between the ages of 17 and 21. College.
Oh, consumption
parties.
Of alcohol. Yeah.
Yes.
Underage
drinking. Underage drinking. That is the most common institutional action we see. Ladies and gentlemen, that can keep you out of medical school. So the next time, if you're under 21, the next time somebody offers you a drink, I want you to think about, is that worth your not being a doctor? Because if you are in the dorm room where there is beer and you're underage and the RA comes in, everybody's busted. And then that institutional action will have to go on your medical school application. Now, I'll tell you that sometimes that can be forgiven. Just like academic integrity, even though I must say admissions committees have a harder time forgiving academic integrity, it can be done. I've seen it, and I've seen students be accepted to medical school after an academic integrity violation. The key to rebounding and recovering from an institutional action, whether it was for academic integrity or underage drinking or unprofessional behavior like fighting. You know, if you get into a fist fight in the dorm, you might have an institutional action against you. The key is that on your medical school application, you will have to disclose that you had the violation, what it is, and then you'll have a box in which to write a paragraph explaining it. And please listen closely. The key is, if you step up to the plate and say that I made a mistake, this was my fault, I will not repeat it, and I learned something from it, and what I learned is spell it out, and this is going to help me be a better doctor. I've seen that explanation work for the medical school admissions committee forgiving you. You can be forgiven for these institutional actions because we have all done something for which we need to be forgiven, and medical school admissions committees know that. So when you say, okay, I did this thing, it was bad, I was young, it was poor judgment, it was my fault, I'll never do it again, I haven't done it again, I learned a lot from it, and this is going to help me be a good doctor. Admissions committees like to hear that and are likely to forgive you if that's what happens. Now, if you got busted for underage drinking your freshman year, and then again your sophomore year, and then again your junior year, then it gets harder and harder to forgive that. The explanations that do you no favors and which are almost never forgiven is when you don't take responsibility. So when you say something like, hey, it wasn't even my beer, it was John's beer, he just asked me to hold it, so I really wasn't doing anything wrong. Or I wasn't cheating, I was just helping out a friend, and I had a misunderstanding about the directions in the class about sharing homework. If it sounds like you're not taking responsibility for it, I've seen the admissions committee be very unforgiving. If you take permission, if you step up to the plate and you say, this was a momentary weakness, I've learned a lot, I'll never do this again, and I think my going through this is going to help me be a better doctor, you have a much better chance of having that institutional action be forgiven.
Okay, great. And then I actually see a great question posted in the Q&A similar to this topic. How do you guys look at W's or incomplete grades on transcripts?
I mean, we see them and generally don't pay a lot of attention to them when they are few in number. If we see lots and lots of withdrawals, then it looks like you're just somebody who is having a hard time being a good planner, being a good strategist. Every once in a while, you know, it's very understandable that something might have come up that you have to drop that class, or, you know, quite frankly, not all professors are good teachers. So you might have wound up in a section of the course that's taught by a professor who's just not doing a good job. In that case, you made a smart decision by withdrawing from that class. So we see W's. We don't spend too much time worrying about that if there are a reasonably small number of them. I mean, if you've withdrawn from every third class you've taken, then it looks like you have problems with judgment and problems with planning.
Okay, perfect. And do you have any advice on students who want to retake courses to improve their overall undergrad GPA? And do you recommend students to retake courses? And how does the admissions committee look at a grade if previously they had failed and later on they had gotten a better score? Is it an average, or do you take those two separately?
We don't necessarily do the averaging. So on the medical school application service, AMCAS is called, American Medical College Application Service, they actually will average your GPA, and we just take that GPA. But we do look at your grades. I mean, we see every course that you've had. Don't retake the course just for your GPA. In other words, let's say you got a C in your major. Don't retake it just because you're worried about your GPA. Retake it for understanding. That's what you want to do, especially with those pre-med prerequisites. You want to really understand the material. So if you got a C in organic chemistry, and if you're honest with yourself, you're still a little clueless about organic chemistry, then by all means retake it. But retake it for understanding. But if you got that C and you feel like, you know, I really do understand this material well, then I wouldn't retake it just for the GPA. Because it's not like if you take it and get an A, that all of a sudden the C is going to disappear from your transcript. We're still going to see it. So it would be a part of your being a professional to say, yeah, you know, I got that C, which is passing, but I think I really need to understand this material better, so I'm going to take it again. Then you're not taking it for the GPA, you're taking it for understanding, and we actually like to see that.
Okay, great. And then how do you guys perceive international degrees in terms of prerequisite satisfaction?
So another good question. So the American Medical College Application Service actually does not evaluate or give you a grade point average for courses that were taken outside of the United States. So we do sometimes see students who completed their bachelor's degree outside of the United States. Now they're here in the United States and they are a citizen, or they have their green card, and they have to do some graduate school or take some courses here in the United States to be evaluated. So keep that in mind. You're at least for the American Medical College Application Service, your courses have to be at an American university for you to get credit for them to be able to calculate that GPA.
Okay, thank you. And moving on to the MCAT, there have been a ton of questions coming in the Q&A, and we had a lot submitted with registration. So what do you recommend is the best time for someone to take the MCAT if they're a full-time student?
It really depends on you and your time management. There are plenty of students who take the MCAT while they're a full-time student who do just fine. Again, you have to be very good at scheduling your time. And you need to have a strategy. So again, a lot of this is about, strategy. So what do I mean by that? If you're planning things ahead, if you have the luxury of being a freshman and you're starting to plan now, then you might want to plan things such that if you want to go straight through, that is, graduate from college and start medical school in the fall, then that junior year is very important, because by the end of that junior year, you need to have your prerequisites completed and you need to be taking the MCAT in that summer between junior and senior year, because that's actually also the summer that you apply. So one scenario would be if you're a freshman with plenty of lead time, planning time, and remember, successful people think not just one, but 2 or 3 steps ahead. So a freshman who wants to be traditional and go right to medical school after graduation might say, well, then that means I need to take the MCAT in the spring of my junior year. And since I want to spend a lot of hours studying for the MCAT in that semester, I want to start arranging my schedule now so that the spring semester of my junior year is relatively light. So I don't have 19 credit hours or 18 credit hours the same semester I'm supposed to be studying for the MCAT. So with pre-planning, you can do that, and you can take the MCAT and do very well while still a full-time student. If your situation is such that you can't do that, and you really feel like you don't have enough time to study for the MCAT while you're also trying to get good grades, then by all means, delay the MCAT. So you may then need to wait until after school is out in May or June to start your heavy MCAT prep and take the MCAT in July or August.
Okay, and then in regards of application timeline, does the time or the month that a student takes the MCAT affect their application?
Yes, because again, most medical schools do rolling admissions. Your application is not complete until you have a recorded MCAT score. So while it is possible, and while you should actually apply before you've taken the MCAT. Let's say you have an MCAT date that is July 1st, but you want to submit your application in June. Go ahead and do that, because that will actually save you 4 weeks. However, the spirit of the question, I think, is, you know, if you're not scheduled to take the MCAT until August, remember, it takes 4 weeks before your score is reported. So if you take it in August, then your score isn't going to be ready to go until September. If you take it in September, and actually at most schools, the September MCAT date is the last one that can be accepted for that application cycle. So that can affect you. One of the best things you can do in this whole process is plan ahead. My very first week actually at college, I took some loose leaf notebook paper and I planned out, this is what I'm going to take first semester freshman year. These are the courses I'm going to take second semester freshman year, first semester sophomore year, second semester sophomore year, first semester junior year. That spring I'm going to be taking the MCAT. I mean, you really want to think ahead and have a good strategy.
Okay, and then building off of what you were saying with planning and thinking ahead, and Rachel actually asked a really great question. She's wondering how she can start her medical school application preparation, even though the application hasn't opened up yet. And Rachel, this is kind of the whole point of PreMed STAR, is that you can log everything inside of your profile, and that way you get everything set up. So in May, when the application does open, you're just copying and pasting and transferring everything there. So that's kind of my favorite aspect of PreMed STAR. And as you guys saw in the beginning, I walked through my entire portfolio, which covers every single aspect of the application. So definitely make sure you sign up for PreMed STAR and get started on your profile.
Excellent. Good answer, Lauren. So yeah, I would just reiterate that. Even though AMCAS hasn't opened up for you to start populating, there's no reason that you can't start writing your personal statement now. Certainly, there's no reason that you can't start to ask professors for letters of recommendation now. In fact, if you're planning to apply this cycle, if you're planning to apply when the application cycle opens up in June of 2018, we usually tell people start asking for letters of recommendation from your professors in January. So you should have started this month, because professors are busy people. And sometimes you have to ask and remind them several times. So even though AMCAS hasn't opened up yet, there are some things you can be working on right now.
That's right. And PreMed STAR is definitely here to help you guys with that. So PreMed STAR actually has a suggested timeline for the basis of prepping for applications. And you can actually be starting now if you want to jump in next cycle. So I will go ahead and post that link on my PreMed STAR wall, so all of you can go check that out after the webinar. Okay, Dr. Capers, how would you reconsider an applicant if they were rejected but had received a higher MCAT score after receiving the rejection?
So that's a good question, and that's a tricky one. So remember, the application deadline is November 1st. So let's say you take the MCAT in June and you don't like that score, and that comes back in July, and you say, well, I'm going to take it the very next time, and you take it in August and it comes back in September. You can certainly be considered on the basis of that second MCAT score, especially if it goes up. The reason that can be tricky, though, is because the applications come in and then they go to the screeners, and then the screeners decide who should be invited for an interview. And so it can be tricky on the timing, and so you may want to be communicating specifically with that medical school, because if your application comes in and you've got a recorded MCAT score, then it's going to be considered a complete application, and it's going to be screened and a decision made at that time. Then if a month later another MCAT score comes in, just to be honest, we don't have a mechanism for taking that application and putting it back through the screening process again. So I would say the best way to handle that is if you get your MCAT score back before you apply and you don't like it, you say, hey, I think I can do better. Contact the medical school and let them know. Say, listen, my future MCAT date is in just a couple weeks. I want to take it again. I really think I can do better. And communicate with them and let them know that, because once it's been seen by somebody who makes a decision to interview or not, I got to tell you, it's unlikely that when your next MCAT comes through, that they're going to flag that application and put it back through the screening process again.
Okay, and you mentioned earlier about how someone, if their GPA is a little bit lower and they have an outstanding MCAT, that can help strengthen the academic portion of their holistic review. We did have a lot of questions coming in the Q&A right here on how do you guys perceive people who take the MCAT multiple times? If someone gets a score they're not completely happy with, would you recommend them to take it again, or should they just adjust the schools they're applying to?
So again, in the quote unquote off season, which is very short, I spend a lot of time in one-on-one meetings with rejected applicants, answering their questions, and very often I'm asked that question, would you recommend that I take the MCAT again? And I answer that question with a question. Give me an honest answer for how well you think you prepared for the MCAT. If they tell me, for instance, this is something that I often hear, well, you know, it was the middle of the semester and I still had papers to write and I still had work to do, and I have a part-time job and I'm in the research lab. And so even though I signed up for the Kaplan course, I didn't really attend the sessions, and I had high hopes for studying 4 hours a night, but I didn't really do that. If that person asks me if they should retake the MCAT, then I say, if those conditions have changed, if it is no longer the middle of the semester and you no longer have a part-time job, you're no longer working in a research lab, and now you can really focus on the MCAT, then by all means retake it. Sometimes though, a student will say, I did everything that I could have done. I took a prep course. I attended the prep course. I put in the hours. I took lots and lots of questions. I took lots of practice MCATs, and I studied 6 months ahead of time, 2 to 4 hours a night. I really don't think that there is anything else I can do. When a student tells me that, honestly, I say, then I would recommend you not take it again. Because if you really feel like you gave it your very best shot, then you're probably not gonna, your second attempt or repeat attempt is probably not gonna be much different. And it can always go down. So we like to see it when you retake it and it goes up. You didn't really do much for yourself other than put yourself through a lot of trauma if you take it and it stays the same or it goes down. So only you will know the answer to that question. Did you really prepare as hard as you humanly possibly can? If yes, then I would not retake it. If though you know there was something holding you back, like many responsibilities and you couldn't study as well as you wanted to, and now those conditions have changed, then by all means retake it.
Okay, great. And you've already mentioned this right now, and I just wanted to address MCAT. It is stressful, but you have so many resources out there. Noor, who is a PreMed STAR member, she's very active on the site. She's actually hosting an MCAT review session tomorrow. So make sure you guys go to the activity stream to go ahead and sign up for that webinar, okay? Now, next question, let's get a little bit more into extracurricular activities. How much do these factor into the admissions process? Is this one of the 33% you were speaking of earlier?
Yes. So remember, experiences, attributes, metrics, and those extracurriculars would fall under experiences. Medical schools like to know that you're well-rounded, that you do more than just study. You don't need, now you have on your medical school application, you have space to list 15 experiences. And I would recommend that you, first of all, I recommend that you try to, as you're going through college or wherever you are now in your life, try to be a well-rounded person. And you want to have at least 1 or 2 of those 15 experiences be something that shows that you do more than studying, that you have some outside interest. If you play soccer every Friday, you should put that on there. If you're in a singing group, you should put that on there. If you're in a movie club where you and your friends go to different movies or watch them on Netflix and critique them, you just want to have something on there that shows you're someone who does more than study. There's a lot of emphasis right now in the medical profession, and particularly in medical school, about preventing burnout. Physicians can just become overwhelmed and get burnt out and can have some real problems. The same thing with medical students. And it turns out one of the best ways to prevent burnout is to have something that de-stresses you. So you do want to have, it makes you look good to show that there is something you do just for pure enjoyment. If it's knitting or crocheting or you know, playing intramural basketball, you want to have that. You want to have that on there. Now, again, of the 15 experiences, you don't want 8 of them to be extracurricular activities, but I would save at least 1 to show that you're somebody that when you close the books, there is something else about life that you enjoy.
Okay, great. And in terms of these extracurriculars, how important is it for someone to have direct patient interaction?
So again, and I'm going to keep coming back to the holistic review, experiences, attributes, and metrics, academic metrics, that's what you'll be judged on. One of the important experiences is healthcare related experience. It is a must. You will not get into medical school, most likely, without healthcare related experiences. Now, what are those healthcare related experiences? Very often when we say that, the only thing people hear is physician shadowing. Physician shadowing is fine if you can get it, but I'm sure many of the participants out there have realized it's getting tougher and tougher for undergraduate students to get physician shadowing because of HIPAA and other requirements that really restrict the opportunities. It doesn't have to be direct patient care experience. I will often talk to students who are disappointed because they volunteered in the emergency room, and they'll say, yeah, I was a volunteer in the emergency room, but they had me in the stock room stacking boxes. I didn't get to interact with any patients. That's okay. You were doing something that was helping out the healthcare system. You were in a healthcare system volunteering your time. If you have patient experience, that's fine. But if you have healthcare related experience where you don't interact with patients, that's fine too. We realize, you know, first of all, as an undergraduate student, about all you'd be able to do anyway is shadow. You know, you're not going to be assisting in surgery or anything like that. So I wouldn't lose too much sleep over that. But some kind of healthcare related experience, whether it's working in a healthcare setting or volunteering in a healthcare setting, you should consider that a must for getting into medical school. But it doesn't have to be direct patient contact.
Okay, and then you always hear about how medical school admissions committees really like to see some research experience. Is that necessarily required, or does it have to be medically related? What's your advice on that?
So research is not required, but it is something that we often see. I can tell you that while it is not required, probably 85 to 90% of the applications we see, the students, the applicants have done some research. So you don't have to do research. It's not mandatory at most medical schools to get an interview or even to get accepted. We interview people who haven't done research. We accept people who haven't done research. But they are definitely in the minority. And if someone has not done research, there's usually something else about their application that is really, really on the ball. Like maybe they worked as a paramedic for 2 or 3 years. So somebody like that wouldn't necessarily have to do research. If you have people out there who are interested in hearing about medical scientist training programs or MD PhD programs, for those, research is absolutely necessary. You will not be considered for an MD PhD program if you've not done research. You can be considered for an MD program if you've not done research, but even for the MD programs, 85% of the applicants we see have done research. The research does not have to be medically related. I've seen research projects in political science. I've seen research projects in English. So it doesn't have to be medical. It doesn't even have to be scientific research. Research is simply asking a question and then taking the steps to answer that question. And so it does not have to be science. It does not have to be medical.
Okay, perfect. And then what types of activities do you recommend for those who are looking to take at least one gap year?
So let's go back to holistic review: experiences, personal attributes, and academic metrics. The experiences that we particularly grade you on at Ohio State are healthcare related experience, community service, leadership, and research. if you're going to take a gap year or 2 or 3, it's important that you're kind of keeping up those experiences in your gap year.
Okay, perfect. And when do you recommend people get started in looking for internships and shadowing opportunities?
I mean, if you know you want to be a physician as early as your freshman year of college, you should start right away. And since I said it that way, you notice I specifically said it that way about starting college, and that's because most medical school admissions committees are not very interested in what you did in high school. On your medical school application, they're interested in knowing what you were doing as a college student. So if you did some great things in high school and then they came to an end when you started college, we don't want to know about that. We want to know what you've done since college. So if you know you want to be a doctor, freshman year is a good time to start accumulating these healthcare related, community service, leadership, and research experiences. The earlier you get started, the better.
Okay, perfect. And then do you guys have like a minimum amount of hours you look for in regards to shadowing? And is it better to just shadow one physician long-term or to see as many specialties as possible?
We do not have a threshold for the number of hours. One of the resources that we put on our admissions page on our College of Medicine website at Ohio State University is a little piece on there that I call What Will the Admissions Committee Think? And it actually is the result of a survey that we gave to our admissions committee to give you an idea of what's going on in the mind of admissions committee members. And one of the questions we ask is how much shadowing is enough? And the most common answer was 40 hours. I'd say the average we see is around 100 hours, and not just shadowing, but healthcare related experiences. But when we asked our physicians how many hours they considered quote unquote enough to really understand what a physician does for a medical school applicant, the most common answer was 40 hours.
Okay, and then do you recommend?
The other half of your question was about whether you shadow one physician in one specialty or multiple specialties. It really does not matter. Let's say you've got 100 hours of shadowing. Let me make the question more specific. If someone has 100 hours of shadowing, would the committee prefer to see shadowing in one specialty for 100 hours or 10 episodes of shadowing in 10 different specialties? And I think I'd say, I know I personally, I really don't care. I just would be happy to see that this person had that much healthcare related experience. It doesn't matter to me if you've done it all in one specialty or if you've mixed it up. Whatever kind of works for you and your lifestyle and your interests.
Great. Okay. And what do you have in terms of advice for people with volunteering in medical settings compared to other types of settings and other organizations?
So you need some healthcare related experience, but we also like to see community service. Now, here's where you can double dip a little bit. So again, at Ohio State, the experiences that we look for, we actually grade you. We will actually grade your application on 4 areas of experiences: healthcare related experience, research, leadership experience, and community service. But you can double dip because sometimes that community service is your healthcare related experience. In other words, maybe you're volunteering at a nursing home or you're volunteering at a hospital. Then you would get double credit for community service and for healthcare related experience. Sometimes they're separate. Sometimes somebody's volunteer hours are at a homeless shelter or at a soup kitchen or in some organization that cleans up the streets and cleans up the parks. That's clearly not healthcare related volunteering. Or sometimes it's the same. Somebody says, well, I only have a few hours a week that I can volunteer. I want it all to be in a healthcare setting, and that's okay with us. Okay,
perfect. And diving into interviews, what do you think is the best preparation for a medical school interview?
So again, if you go to our tab called Tips and Advice on the Admissions tab, of the Ohio State University College of Medicine website. We've got an essay on there, pretty detailed, that gives advice on medical school interview tips. Briefly, you want to prepare for it. And that means mock interviews and practice. I mean, I practice in the mirror. I've had several jobs now, and I have not had a job that I interviewed for or I didn't practice before the actual interview. And what I mean by that is I actually sit there and say, okay, what questions do I think they're going to ask? If they ask me this question, this is the answer I'll give. And if this answer sparks them to ask this follow-up question, then I'm going to give them that answer. So, I mean, I actually rehearse and practice, and I recommend you do that. Now, the key is, even though you've been rehearsing, you still want your answers to sound unrehearsed. So I'd say one thing that's key is practicing. Another thing that's key is knowing exactly what is in your personal statement. Sometimes the interval between when you write your personal statement, which could be months before you apply, and when you get your interview, it could be months and you've forgotten what's in there. And it looks bad if you're asked about something that was in your personal statement and you stumble because you forgot that was in your personal statement. So review your personal statement the night before your interview. And another hint is you want to act like you're excited to be there. When you pick 16 schools to apply to, on your 16 list of 16, you're going to have what in your mind is your top choice, and you're going to have what in your mind is your number 16 choice. You don't want the people at your number 16 choice to know that they're your number 16 choice. And sometimes students or candidates will just look so unenthusiastic at the interview that you get the impression that you are the last school that they want to go to. You never want the medical school to think that. So be smiling, be enthusiastic, and really act like you are grateful to be there.
Okay, perfect.
I'm sorry, let me just finish this last thing, Lauren. Sure. And one way you make your interviewers feel like you're happy to be there is by you asking them questions. Mm-hmm. I end all of my interviews by saying, so, what questions do you have for me? And if the student doesn't have any questions, that gives me the impression that they're not really interested in Ohio State. So even if you've already had your questions answered 20 times, you still want to be sure you have one question to ask that will make me think that you are really interested in my medical school.
Okay, great. I do like that tip. Most interviews I've ever gone to, they always end with a type of question like that. So you definitely want to come prepared. Okay, and then getting into non-traditional topics, do you guys screen non-traditional applicants differently from traditional applicants? And do you have any specific advice for how non-traditional should prepare differently?
We do not screen them differently. We look at the experiences, attributes, and metrics just the same. We do take certain things into consideration. For instance, one thing we know is that it is easier to do some of the volunteer community service experiences while you're in college because maybe your sorority or fraternity has something set up. Maybe your pre-med club has certain avenues to go do volunteering. And so it can be easier than, say, someone who's been out of school for 3 years to get that volunteering. So we do take that into consideration. But it's still an overall look at you holistically to see if you fit our mission and if you're going to be someone who's successful in our medical school. So I would say the non-traditional applicant still needs to do an evaluation of themselves, an honest evaluation. Are my experiences, my attributes, and my academic metrics predicting that I'll be successful in medical school? If one of those three is weak, then strengthen it. Take the time to strengthen that particular attribute.
Okay, great. And then I think what you just said there kind of follows in with this question where non-traditional students who do have masters or doctorates should be thinking kind of the same exact way. Is that correct?
Yes, yes. So we do occasionally see, not very often, but we occasionally see someone who already has a doctorate. They've got a PhD, maybe in engineering or something like that. we still need to see all of those other components. So, so please don't think if you're non-traditional and you have a PhD in engineering or something else that we're not going to look for volunteer, community service, healthcare related experience, just like we would everybody else. We still will.
Okay, and then how does it look if you are a non-science major applying to medical school?
It's refreshing. I mean, it's refreshing to see a music major or a theater major or an English major applying to medical school. And what we always say about majors is please pick a major that you like to study. Don't pick a major because you think this is the major to get into medical school. If you are passionate about art, major in art. If you are passionate about jazz trombone, major in jazz trombone. Because from any major, you can take your pre-med prerequisites. Now, having said that, it is true that science majors do have an advantage in terms of GPA. Because when you apply to medical school, the primary application service, the MCAT, will give us your science GPA. In fact, it's called BCPM, your GPA in your biology, chemistry, physics, and math courses, your all other GPA in your non-science courses, and then your cumulative GPA. So we see all three. An advantage that a science major would have over, say, a voice major is that that voice major has to take all their voice classes, and they only have time to take biology, general chemistry, organic chemistry, and physics, and that's it. So if they stumble in those classes, then it will hurt their science GPA. If you're a science major and you're taking many more science classes, then you can stumble in one or two classes and still make up for it. You have more buffer with your other science classes. So that is the theoretical advantage of being a science major. But for a non-science major who does well in those science classes, you know, it does not hurt you, and it can even help you because, you know, when 90% of the people applying are either biology or chemistry majors, it can just be refreshing to see an English major applying to medical school.
Mm-hmm. And I did see a couple questions come into the Q&A a little while back. Would you say that there is one major that is best for being a pre-med?
No. The best major is what you enjoy studying.
Okay, great answer there. Okay. Oh, and you did mention a little bit about students who had PhDs, but do you have any opinions on applicants who leave another professional program to pursue medicine?
Yes, we see this occasionally. If this is your route, then that personal statement, you need to really dig into kind of what your thoughts are and how you've evolved to know that you want to be medicine. For instance, let's say you're in a PharmD program. You want to get your doctorate in pharmacy. But after 2 years, you decide, you know, maybe this isn't what I really want to do. I really want to be a physician. And so you apply to medical school. There might be some admissions committee members that are a little skeptical, that'll say to you, well, this student got accepted into a PharmD program. That's competitive. So they took a spot from somebody, and now they're deciding that that's not what they want, and now they're applying to medical school. How do we know if we give them this medical school spot that they're not then going to change and say, no, what I really want is to go to law school? So there's just, I'd say, a little more burden on an applicant like that to explain the why. And that's what you really need to take up most of your personal statement doing. Why? Why are you switching from nursing to medicine, or from dentistry to medicine, or from pharmacy to medicine? You'll have to convince the admissions committee members that it is very well thought out, and that if they give you a spot in a medical school class, you're not going to say, oh, you know, business school sounds good. So that's your assignment on your personal statement. And of course, if you get an interview, then you will be questioned about that during your interview. But it happens. I mean, right now I have some nurses in medical school. They were working as a nurse, or they were even in nursing school, and they decided that they would prefer to be a physician, and they applied and they got in. So it happens. but you have to do a good job of explaining both in your personal statement and your interview why you're switching.
Okay. And then one of these questions did come in with registration about a student who's about to matriculate into a Caribbean medical school. Should they consider transferring to a traditional school? I'm assuming they are meaning a domestic one in the U.S. before year 3.
Well, I'll say this about going to a Caribbean medical school can it can put you in a difficult place for several reasons. There is still, and it's unfortunate, but a stigma against graduates of the Caribbean medical schools. There is a stigma that those schools are easier to get into and they don't train you as well. Whether or not that's true, I'm not saying it's true, but that is the current philosophy out there that a lot of people have. If you have the option of somewhere after your first year in a Caribbean school transferring to a U.S. medical school, if you can do it, I think I would probably recommend that. You might find that it's harder to do than you think, though. A lot of medical schools now have a curriculum that's so integrated that actually it's only a few that will allow transfers, and that's even from another U.S. medical school. Our curriculum at Ohio State, for instance, is so lockstep, and each step is built on the previous step that we no longer take transfer students. We no longer let people transfer into the second year or into the third year because then they have not learned the things that we think it's important for them to learn in the first 2 years. So long story short, if you're matriculating at a Caribbean medical school, if you have the opportunity, if you can do it, transfer to a U.S. medical school, then I would recommend it. I think that would be a good idea.
Okay, great. And thank you so much, Dr. Capers. All of these answers.
I'm sorry, let me say one more thing.
Sure.
So one of my favorite trainees, who is an African-American woman, and she now is an interventional cardiologist like I am. She did her medical school in the Caribbean. She went to Ross University. She did her residency in the United States at the University of Iowa. We recruited her to come to Ohio State to do her cardiology training, and then she stayed for interventional cardiology training, and now she's an outstanding physician. So I don't want to discourage anybody. I don't want to leave you. I might have sounded a little discouraging back there when I first answered the question. You can be very successful starting out at a Caribbean medical school. It is a little more difficult, but it can be done, and I know some fine physicians who did their medical school in a Caribbean medical school.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for clearing that up, and thank you so much for taking the time to join us. Unfortunately, we're running out of time here, but there are a ton of questions that we didn't have the chance to answer, and Dr. Capers and I are going to make sure that we address all of those and post them onto the PreMed STAR website for all of you to review.
Yes.
We also will be posting this broadcast so you guys can rewatch it if you missed any of the answers. Dr. Capers, thank you so much for joining us. Everyone say thank you in the chat. Do you have any last tips you want to leave us with?
Believe in yourself. Sometimes when I hear myself talking about this stuff, I can imagine that if you're early on in the process, you might be getting butterflies in your stomach just hearing us talk about this, and it might seem really daunting. You can do this. You can do this. Just take it one step at a time. Plan in advance. Work hard. You remember, you've already done some things that other people are looking at you wondering how you did it, right? So there are some students who graduated from high school who didn't get in college, and they're looking at you like, wow, how did you do that? So just like you were able to conquer that, you can conquer this. Just take your time and be strategic. You can do this.
Okay, thank you so much for all of your advice tonight. And I just want to leave everyone here with just a few last little tips. Don't forget about the challenge we have where you guys can win a free MCAT prep course. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen one more time so that you guys can see exactly what this challenge entails. So from now on until February 1st at 11:59 Eastern Time, go ahead and invite your friends to join PreMed STAR, all right? And then you guys can win a free comprehensive MCAT prep course. And leading up to this webinar, we did have a little bit of a giveaway where whoever recruited the most friends got some Kaplan review books. And so real quick, I just wanted to give a shout out to our 2 winners, and we're gonna go ahead.
Say, Lauren, so am I done?
You are finished, yes. So I will catch
okay.
up with you and we will finish everyone's questions.
Okay, I didn't know if I was eligible to participate in the contest or not.
Only if you want to retake your MCAT.
Yep. Okay, all right, then I'm gonna log off. Take care, everybody, and good luck.
Okay, thank you so much. And as I was just saying, everyone, we did have a competition going on beforehand where you had the chance to win some comprehensive MCAT review books. And I just want to announce that that's going to go to Annalise Giordano and Candace Fox. So we'll be reaching out to you guys through the message. And real quick, I just want to announce that we do have our February webinar posted. It's going to be about applying to osteopathic medical school. So all you future DOs, we're going to go over everything that you need to know. And we're going to have Miss Whitney Porter from LMU DCOM join us. LMU DCOM is one of those schools on the PreMed STAR website. So before this webinar, you guys should really check out their page. They're very active and have been great to have on the site, all right? So thank you so much for joining us. Dr. Capers and I are going to address all your questions and post it on the site. Don't forget to sign up for PreMed STAR, connect with myself, and update your profile. All right, guys? Thank you so much for joining.